It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Dr. Thomas Dammrich, former CEO of the National Marine Manufacturers Association and the IPC-Connecting Electronic Circuits Association. Tom was president of NMMA for 21 years, and upon assuming the role, he knew he had to get the industry working together and focused on things everyone could agree on. One of the first things he tackled was focusing on market expansion efforts that were also measurable. His leadership helped unify the industry to do just that with the Discover Boating campaign. Tom also served as president of IPC, an international trade association of companies producing printed circuit boards and doing electronics manufacturing services. After retiring from the NMMA in 2019, Tom has continued his service on a number of boards of directors and has chaired or served on over 15 boards, including both nonprofit and for-profit companies. Tom has a BA in economics, an MBA in finance, and an MS in accountancy, and a doctorate of business administration, all from DePaul University in Chicago. Tom Dammrich, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brant. Glad to be with you.
Good to have you here today again and connect with you. We spoke a few weeks back, and as we do with all of our podcasts, we kind of like to start at your beginning. Tell us a little bit about your early life and where you grew up, mom and dad, and brothers and sisters.
So I grew up in southern Illinois near St. Louis, a town called East St. Louis.
Right.
I have 6 siblings. I'm the
Wow.
middle child of 7. However, the 3 older were 6, 8, and 10 years older than me, and the younger were 2, 4, and 7 years younger.
Wow.
I'm sorry, 6, 8, and 10 years older, and 2, 4, and 7 years younger. So I often say that I have the characteristics of both a middle child and a first child. So,
Right.
so I was
Right.
the oldest of the youngest, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah.
But
What did mom and dad do? Mom was pretty busy in the home, it sounds like.
well, she was, but she also taught grade school at a Catholic grade
Oh,
school, special education.
cool.
My father owned his own business, a dry
Uh-huh.
cleaner.
Okay.
So, I mean, we had the double income family, well before that became the popular thing
Yeah.
to do. But
Yeah. Cool. Cool. What were some of the early memories that you had growing up? Things that maybe mom and dad either taught you, or was there a favorite uncle or aunt or grandparent that had an impressionable role on you, Tom?
so in my earliest years, we lived right next door to my aunt and uncle, my
Uh-huh.
dad's mother, and my dad's sister and her husband, and my dad's brother lived with them as well.
Right.
And I used to go over there almost every day to visit, and they'd always give me saltine crackers with grape jelly, which was a real treat for me then.
I imagine.
So that is one of my fondest memories. We
Yeah.
moved when I was 3 years old, and I just remember leaving the house in the morning at the crack of dawn, finding my friends, going out and playing all day,
Yeah.
not coming home until dinner time, and nobody ever worried about where we were or what
Yeah.
we were doing.
Life was different back then. I lived a similar youth, but
Yeah, it was very different.
were you a good student in school?
So that's interesting. I was a good student in high school and college, but I frequently tell the story about when I came home with my first report card in first grade. I had straight C's, and I was so proud because they all looked the same. And I showed it to my mother, who was a teacher, and with great pride. And she looked at it and she said, "Well, I don't think that's so hot." And it just crushed me.
Oh, man.
And I think it took the rest of my grade school years to get my enthusiasm or motivation or confidence back to be a good student. But I did, and I was a good student in high school and college.
Amazing how some of those impressionable things early on can really have that kind of impact on you. Or did you have some favorite teachers? Did you were involved in any sports in school? What were kind of some of the extracurricular activities you were involved with?
So I played some baseball as a youth, but I did not play a lot of sports. In high school, I was on the school paper. I was on the debate team. I probably did more intellectual pursuits than athletic pursuits. In high school, it's interesting. So growing up in East St. Louis in the 50s and early 60s, it was during, the Jim Crow days. And I was fortunate in high school to have a priest, Father Genesio, who really taught me and others that we were all equal, regardless of the color of our skin. And, we talk a lot about racism these days, and, nobody's born racist. It's a learned behavior. Right. And I credit Father Genesio for teaching me as best he could to treat all people with dignity and respect and equality. And I think that has been one of the more profound experiences that teachers had on me.
Very much a biblical principle. Huh?
Yeah.
Good for you. I love that. What about entrepreneurial activities? Did you have the ubiquitous paper route, or sell Christmas cards at Christmas time, or other things that you did to raise money and have fun with growing up?
So I did have the paper route from, I guess, maybe I was 7 years old or something. I don't remember, but I had my bike and I had my papers and I had my route and I delivered them. And every Friday I'd go door to door and make my collections for the week. And I had a newspaper stand on Sundays to sell the Sunday paper. And when I graduated from paperboy, I, at a very early age, went to work for my father in his dry cleaners, and did that all the way through high school. And that's where I earned my spending money.
Yeah. Well, you went on to DePaul University and got quite a few degrees there. So I want to talk a little bit about that. You had a good long education and then went on as well, I think, to get another master's at Western Governors. Tell us about your choice of DePaul. Was that a natural one for you, or was there, other factors that played into your going there?
So I don't know. This is probably a bit of an unusual story, but growing up, both parents worked because they had to. We didn't have a lot of money. Although when you're a kid, you don't really know that. But I was a first generation college student. I had older siblings who went to college, but I didn't get a lot of direction about college. And so I went to my college counselor in high school, and he threw 70 brochures at me and said, "Take a look at these." So I took them home and I paged through them and I picked the 3 that had the lowest application fee. It was $10. Yeah. And I'll mention that, it never occurred to me in high school that I could go to college anywhere further than a day's drive from my house.
Yeah.
And so I applied to DePaul, University of Illinois, and DePaul in Greencastle, Indiana. And to be honest with you, the decision which one to go to came down to which one was going to give me the most financial aid, so it was going to cost me the least, and that was DePaul. And when I showed up there in the fall of 1970, I had never seen the school until I set foot on it to matriculate.
Yeah, cool.
But I loved it.
Liked it because you hung out there a long time.
I did. I love DePaul. I love the city. I've stayed in the city the rest of my life here, and it's been a great experience.
Yeah. And you did some early studies in economics. Then I know you went on and got an MS in accounting. It seems like the numbers kind of came to you. Was that a natural thing, or did you decide that that was the area you wanted to study? How did you kind of get into the accounting, economics, finance area?
So when I started out, I thought I wanted to be a political science major, but after the first course, I decided that wasn't for me. So I took an economics course, and I just loved it.
Yeah.
And it was, I think economics is just a fantastic major because it teaches you how to think, and it
That's right.
gives you a perspective on things that are happening in the world that's a little different than a lot of other people have.
Yeah.
And so I then, after the graduating, uh, I went to work at DePaul as assistant director of housing and pursued my MBA there with
Yeah.
a concentration in finance. A few years later, my wife does not like to see me doing nothing. She just cannot stand seeing me doing nothing. So she told me to go back to school. And so I went back and got my Master of Science in Accounting and sat for the CPA exam and passed it. And I've always been a lifelong learner. And my first, probably my third boss actually, when I was working for the Illinois Bankers Association, had his DBA, his Doctorate of Business Administration from Indiana. And I always thought I would like to get my Doctorate of Business Administration. And as it turned out, DePaul started offering one just a few years ago. And at age 63,
Hmm.
I decided to enroll in the Doctorate of Business Administration program at
Good for
DePaul. It
you.
was a 3-year program. It was a lot of work, um, but I graduated in 2019, and it, I would do it. I would do it again. I loved
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
loved every minute of it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. God, lifelong learner. I love it. And during those college years, did you go back home and work in dad's dry cleaning shop, or was there other work that you had on campus?
So I worked part time on campus at the university,
Right.
uh, and I guess it was I went home the summer after my freshman year, but after the summer after my sophomore year, I stayed in Chicago and I worked in a warehouse on the south side, um, driving a forklift truck,
Hmm.
uh, picking orders of food. It was
Oh,
food goods to be put on trucks and shipped out.
right.
And interesting story here. Um, I was, what was I, 19, 20 years old. I had no training on operating a forklift. They put me on a forklift and put me to work.
Oh my
Well,
gosh.
one night I was on the night shift, and one night I was probably driving a little too fast, trying to get my work done, and I crashed the forklift into these racks holding all this food and bent them, and a big crate of Spam came falling from 40 feet in the air
Oh,
down on top of the forklift, which was covered, so I was protected. I wasn't
thank
hurt.
goodness.
And at the end of the night, the boss called me in and he said, Tom, I should fire you for this. But he said, you work so hard. I'm not going to fire you. I'm just going to put you on the dock. All you're going to do is load trucks. So you don't have to drive that forklift very far. But he still gave me no training. So
Right.
I'm loading my first truck and I put a pallet in. I go back out. I get another pallet. I bring it into the truck and I'm going to put it on top of the first pallet.
Oh
So I'm
no.
watching the pallet to clear the top of the pallet that was already in place. And the top of the forklift went through the roof of the truck.
Oh my gosh.
And the truck driver's standing there and he says, Kid, I'd let it go, but this is a leased truck. I got to report it. So, so he reported it at the end of the night. The boss called me in. He said, Tom, I should fire you, but I'm not going to. I'm going to transfer you to another warehouse where you will never drive a forklift again and you will unload trucks by hand. And that's what I did the rest of the summer.
I love it. Oh, that's great. So
But
what was that?
it gets to what the lesson there was.
Yeah,
You got to give people training
that's
so
right.
that they
Yeah,
have the skills they need to do the job.
yeah.
And you can't just expect to put people in a job that they've had no training for and expect to excel at it.
Throw them in the deep end and expect them to swim, right? Oh,
Exactly.
goodness, I love it. So what was that first real job when you got out of school? Was it with the Illinois Bankers Association? Is that where you started your career?
No, so my first real job, when I graduated from DePaul, I was the assistant director of housing at
Hmm.
DePaul.
Okay.
And the director of housing was also the director of the student union and had just assumed responsibility as director of athletics.
Wow. Big job.
So he was spending 98% of his time in athletics. And I was assistant director of housing, but I was running student housing for DePaul University
Hmm.
right out of college.
Wow.
Tremendous amount of
Yeah.
responsibility, authority, independence, freedom, and it was a tremendous growth opportunity.
Now, did you have people reporting to you in that role as well, or are you an individual contributor?
So I had an assistant who reported to me, and then of course all the resident advisors reported to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also
Big
had a
group.
summer conference program, so I had a whole crew of workers who uh, would clean the rooms every day as we had turnover in the
Sure.
dorm rooms during the
Yeah.
summer conference period. So
What kind of training did you get for that job, Tom?
none.
They threw you into that one too.
Yeah, I mean, I had been a resident advisor myself. I had
Right.
been chairman of the Student Activities
Yeah.
Council. So I had managed a lot of things, but
Kind of worked your way into that job.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I love it. And then, how did you kind of get into the finance sector then? How did you, kind of utilize all those degrees in accounting?
From the housing department, I went downtown to work on my MBA and got a job working for the dean of the Graduate School of Business.
Uh-huh.
And as I was finishing up my MBA, he was contacted by a friend of his who was the president of the Illinois Bankers Association. Said, "I'm looking for a director of education. You
Hey.
got anybody you could suggest to me?" And the dean knew I'd be leaving soon, and so he suggested me, and I met with the president of the Illinois Bankers Association. And long story short, he hired me, and I was there for 13 years and rose
Yeah.
from director of education to senior vice president, the
Senior
number two
VP.
guy there.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. And then it looks like went and spent a few years in the electronics industry. How did you kind of make that pivot?
well, so my boss at the Illinois Bankers Association was young. I mean, he was probably 15 years from retirement, and I had been there 13 years. And so I wasn't going to be able to succeed him anytime soon.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to run my own association. I wanted to be the CEO of the association.
Hmm.
So I began interviewing, and I interviewed for a lot of CEO jobs,
Yeah.
and I finally landed one as the CEO of IPC, the Institute for Connecting Electronic Circuits, uh, and started that in January of 1999, I think. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, it was interesting, though. And I tell people, I learned something with every interview I did. I probably did a dozen. I probably interviewed for a dozen or more CEO jobs that I didn't get.
And
And I
they were
learned,
all associations. They were all
they were all
you
associations.
knew you wanted to be involved in association. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I learned something from every interview that made me a better interviewer the next time.
What were some of those lessons that you learned in that interview process?
Well, I'll give you an example. So, in one interview, I was interviewing for the Illinois State Association of School Boards. And they asked me toward the end of the interview, which had been going very well, they said, "So you send your kids to private school. How are you going to be a representative
Mm.
for public education?"
Mm.
I was stumped.
Yeah.
But on the drive home, the answer came to me. And it was that my credibility, authority, whatever, as a spokesman for public education did not derive from my personal experience. It derived from who I represented,
Mm.
which were the
Yeah.
public school boards.
Right.
And so it forced you to think deeper into things and helped me to think more quickly on my feet about what really was my role
Yeah.
as the CEO.
So what made you select was it IPC Association, right? The
Yeah.
electronic industries. What kind of light kind of shined from that opportunity that was different from all the others, made you go in that direction?
So IPC was was a bigger association.
Mhm.
It was at the time, I think, about $16 million. I eventually grew that to $32 million. It was, I mean, they had great engagement from the members, and it just looked like a real opportunity to be able to have an impact. And what I learned, I mean, working for entrepreneurs, because these were all entrepreneurs in the
Sure.
electronics industry, making
Yeah.
print circuit boards and doing electronics assembly, is that I loved working for entrepreneurs. I loved their passion. I loved the risk they took. I loved the,
Mm.
uh, they were how committed they were to both their company and their industry.
Yeah.
And so, when I moved from electronics to the boating industry, it was the same thing. I was working largely for entrepreneurs. We had some Fortune 100 companies in the industry too, but it was largely entrepreneurs, and um, they're just great people.
Now I want to ask you about that because again, great pivot, right? Electronics to the sport fish and boating industry. Had that been a passion of yours? Are you someone that enjoyed out on the water, or did this just come along as just another great association to lead and develop, or a combination of both?
So at the time, I was not a boater. However, today I do own a boat and I
Right.
enjoy boating. But at the
Yeah.
time, I was not a boater. I had friends who had boats. I'd been boating, but I was not a boat owner myself. I was not a
Yeah.
fisherman myself. Uh, but association executives quickly learn everything they need to know about new industries. Every
Yeah.
industry has its own jargon, its own acronyms. Um, but you learn it quickly, and I quickly did become passionate about boating and about the boating industry. So.
Yeah, yeah. Was it unusual that they selected you having not been, that active as a voter, or was the selection criteria really kind of due to your past association creds, so to speak?
Yeah, they were really looking for somebody who could effectively lead the association,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
could, I mean, the association, especially as I moved to NMMA, it was a larger group, and we were involved in certifying boats, doing industry statistics,
Right.
producing boat shows, doing government advocacy, and and they needed somebody who could effectively manage what was a pretty complex uh, organization.
Right, right. Now you retired from there. I think it was back in October of 19, just before the pandemic kind of hit us all. But you spent, a good 20 years there. Tell us about some of the challenges that the MMMA. Where was it when it began? We spoke a little bit about that in the bio, when we introduced you, and there was obviously some things to get straightened out. And you know, tell us just a little bit more about the journey, particularly your leadership, opportunities there over the years, the decades, literally.
So when I joined NMMA, it was about a $32 million association.
Mm.
Um,
And that's annual fees, right? Is that
uh,
what that's based on?
well, that was membership dues. It was boat show revenues. It
Right.
was certification fees. It was everything.
Yeah.
And the prior CEO had left 2 years before I started, and so the
Mm.
organization had been operating without a permanent CEO for 2 years.
Wow.
And they had an internal guy that had been kind of acting, was not given the title, but was kind of acting. And then they brought in an industry person, kind of part-time CEO, to advise this internal person. And anyway, you can imagine that any organization that has without the leadership of a CEO
Yeah.
for 2 years
Wow.
is a little bit of a mess.
Rudderless.
Yeah, rudderless. And
Pardon the
frankly,
pun.
frankly, the industry's perception of the organization was not very positive. There were
Mm.
strong supporters who knew they needed the association, but many thought that the association had completely lost touch with its members and the
Wow.
industry. I remember one of my first meetings with the staff. They said, we got a big problem. The trade press is constantly criticizing us,
Mm.
and we don't know what to do. And so, actually, the first thing I did was, after learning as much as I could, I invited all the trade press to Chicago to meet with me at one time. And I started the whole meeting off with a presentation about 10 myths about NMMA, and
All the rumors that have been circulating.
I took on all the negatives
Yeah.
directly head on and
Good
addressed
for
them.
you. Yeah.
And that was kind of my style thereon. And we grew. We acquired boat shows. We developed a whole industry marketing campaign called Discover Boating. So we were spending about $12 to $15 million a year. So sold the industry on contributing $12 to $15 million a year to do that. It was a very successful campaign. Things were going along great. And then the global financial crisis happened in 2008.
Yeah.
And the association went from 64 million in revenues to 32 million in revenues.
Back down again.
And I had to reduce the staff from 140 to 87.
Yikes.
It was an incredibly painful period.
Yeah.
But we came through it healthy and realized that, we grew it back to 64 million, but we grew it back to 64 million with 105 employees. That we really didn't need 140 to do it all if we focused on things that were most important to the industry.
Right.
So we got through that, and as I say, we grew it back to 64 million. And then our biggest boat show was the Miami International Boat Show, and it drove membership, it drove revenues, it drove visibility and prestige. I mean, it helped us to do a lot of the things we were able to do.
Now, is that the one that's held in Fort Lauderdale, or is that actually a separate show?
No, it's in Miami. It's a separate show. It's equal in size to the Fort Lauderdale show, but it's not, doesn't have the big super yachts.
Got it.
And the Miami Beach Convention Center, this is about 2015 or 16, said they were closing for renovations. The show would have to find a new location.
Oh my.
Well, this was a 1 million square foot show, and you can't have the Miami Boat Show in Orlando. So we had to find a place in Miami, and we had about 12 months to do it.
Wow.
And so the city of Miami had a greenfield site that was called Miami Marine Stadium, and there was they called it a stadium, but it was like a bleachers that faced a lagoon of water where they used to do a lot of water shows and things.
Right.
But there was many acres upland of that. And so we worked with the city, and they spent $20 million to put in infrastructure we needed to do the show, which was mostly electricity and paving and all that sort of things. And then we built 600,000 square feet of tents and built a 700 boat marina every year to house the show, and then tore it down every year.
Wow.
And during that period, the residents of the city of Key Biscayne did not want the boat show in that location. So they took us to court, and they were fighting us the whole way. And if we lost those court challenges, the show would not be held. And so essentially we risked everything we had on holding this show in Miami.
Wow.
I remember a board meeting where I said to the board, look, this was in July, the show was in February. I said, one choice is we could just stop now and we'll lose about $8 or $9 million based on commitments we've made that we're going to have to pay for. I said, or we can go forward, produce the show, and one of two things happens. We're successful, we beat back these legal challenges, and the show happens, and we're probably going to lose about $8 or $9 million just because it cost so much more to produce the show there than it did in its original location.
Right.
Or Key Biscayne is successful, and they stop the show a month or 2 weeks before the show was to happen, in which case every commitment is fully made. And if that happens, we'll lose $20 million.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, and by the way, $20 million is all we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the board, I mean, you never saw
horrible choices.
So many scared faces as you looked around the room.
Yeah.
And they said, Tom, what do you recommend? And I said, I don't think we have any choice but to go forward.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, then we're all in. Let's go forward.
Right.
And we did, and we succeeded. And it was came right down to the wire as to whether or not we were going to have the show, but we did. So,
Yeah.
and we had the show there very successfully for about 7 years thereafter. So,
Did you have the legal challenge every year?
no,
No.
no,
It was
we
it
beat
was a
back the
one
legal
time.
challenge. We wrapped them all up in the second year,
Yeah. Right.
but
Right. Wow. Challenging.
yeah, yeah,
Now, the associations act as nonprofits, right?
yes.
So, do you have a board that you report to that are kind of governing? What's the structure of those
Oh
associations
yeah,
or
we had
societies?
I had a board of directors and an executive committee
Right.
that provided the strategic direction, that approved the budget, and we took this my board over the course of the 20 years took some really strong, tough decisions that they had
Right.
to make.
Yeah.
I had one chairman that always talked about us taking a courage pill. Um, let's have the courage to do what we know is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Wow. I love
And
that.
so along the way, we took a voluntary certification program and made it mandatory for membership.
Hmm.
We created the Discover Boating program and created a mandatory funding model.
Hmm.
And I guess not amazingly, but partially amazingly, this same chairman said to me, Tom, if you lead, they will follow, and they did.
What led you to retirement back in October 19?
Well, I'd been at it 21 years.
Yeah.
We had come through the Miami Boat Show difficulty. I'll tell you that the year that we were planning the Miami Boat Show, because of the risk and the high stakes involved, I'm not sure I got a good night's sleep one night that entire year.
I can imagine.
And it just took a lot out of me.
Takes a toll on
And
you. Yeah.
and I tell the worst part wasn't me or wasn't the stress I was having. I had a staff of really committed people,
Right.
and during that year, they worked so hard
Yeah.
that I was concerned about them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I needed to succeed for them and for the industry, and that was the hardest part.
Did you anoint a successor from the ranks as you, stepped down from the organization there?
Well, I tried to get a couple of people internally ready to take over the job, but the board decided to do a national search,
Outside
and
search.
the internal candidates were considered, but at the end of the day, they hired an external candidate
Yeah.
to replace
Yeah.
me.
Now, what do you do to keep yourself busy so your wife's not worried about
So when you say I retired, Brant, I
you?
retired. I retired from stress and responsibility, not from
Yeah.
work. I
Not from work,
love
right?
to work, and
Yeah.
so I am probably as busy today as I've ever been.
Good for you.
So I have a friend who runs the National Association of Healthcare Quality, and I am helping her. It started out as a part-time consultant, then when I retired, but it has evolved into a full-time job.
Awesome.
But I'm also on a couple of boards. I
Yeah.
do a little consulting in the marine industry. Uh, I got my hand in a lot of different things, and I'm very busy. I also have 12 grandchildren. Uh,
Fantastic.
so there's
So your wife's not worried.
my wife's not worried. If anything, it's Tom, can you stop working for a minute and spend some time with us?
I love it. That's great. Well, listen, Tom, this has been a real pleasure, and we're just about out of time. But we always like to ask our guests to, kind of share some of their wisdom and sage advice about, looking towards their career and maybe making it into the corner office someday. What would you say are some of the 2 or 3 key points that help guide you, in your success in the various corner offices that you've held over the decades?
One of the most profound pieces of advice I got from my father.
Hmm.
So he owned a dry cleaners. I worked in the cleaners at the front
Yeah.
desk, so I was engaging with the public constantly. And anyone who's works with the public knows that they're not always nice.
Hmm.
And some people would come in and they'd just be nasty to you.
Yeah.
And my dad took me aside one day and he said, Tom, he said, when they're nasty to you, it's not about you. Don't take it personally.
Yeah.
He said, you don't know what's going on in their life. Did they just have a fight with their wife? Did they just have a car accident? Did someone die? Do they have a child who's sick? He said, you don't know what's going on in their life. So it's not about you. Do not take it personally. And that has been a guiding principle that has helped me throughout my career. So, people come at me, I don't take it personally. And I try to understand, listen and understand their point of view to find where the common ground is. And another, one of the manufacturers, boat manufacturers, was on my board the entire time I was there, once told me, she said, Tom, all the problems I ever had have been resolved, except the ones I have today. And they will be resolved too. And if you keep things in that perspective, it just helps you do your job.
Yeah, navigate. Love it. Well, Tom Dammrich, most recently President of the National Marines Manufacturers Association, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
My pleasure, Brant.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.